The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. My name is Miriam Khaled. This is not just a story I tell. It is the truth I lived, the pain I endured, and the hope that saved me. For many years I walked in shadows I did not choose, bound by a faith that was handed to me, sustained by fear, and surrounded by a silence that dared me never to question. But something began to stir deep within me, a whisper I could not silence, a whisper that called me to seek the light even when every part of my life told me to stay in the dark. If you are listening to this, and you have your own questions, your own fears, your own sense that something is missing, then lean in. This is not just my story. This could be yours. Listen until the end, because I believe the same hand that pulled me from the flames can reach into your life right now. I was born in a small, dusty village on the edge of the desert in northern Algeria. Life in our community was simple in possessions but rigid in rules. Our home was built of clay walls, offering little comfort but plenty of law. Law forged over generations of tradition and guarded by unwavering devotion to Islam. My father, Yusuf Khaled, was more than a man of religion. In our household, he was the religion. His word carried the weight of divine law, and his prayers thundered through our walls as if spoken from the heavens themselves. My mother, Fatima, was softer in voice, but no less firm in her submission. Together they raised 5 children, and as the eldest, I was expected to lead by example, to obey without question, and to guide my siblings in the same path. From my earliest memory, my day began in darkness, before the sun or the birds, with my father's voice calling me to prayer. The expectation was absolute. I was never allowed to linger in bed or rub my sleepy eyes for more than a breath. I had to move quickly, kneel, bow, and recite. My forehead pressed into the cold woven carpet as my lips whispered Arabic words I did not understand. They flowed from my mouth not because I believed them, but because not saying them was not an option. In our home, religion was not a choice. It was air, and not breathing was forbidden. Our days were shaped by the 5 daily prayers, our words molded by the Quran, and our hearts pressed into shape by the fear of Allah. Even when my father was not in the room, his presence was felt, in his expectations, his judgment, and the silent warning of his disappointment. From a young age, I was taught that obedience was the highest virtue. Questioning, even in whispers, was a betrayal. Any sign of curiosity about the world beyond, any hesitation in prayer, any dreamy gaze during recitation was met with my mother's steady look or her quiet words. Fear for your soul, Miriam. Fear was not just present. It was the very thread that ran through each moment of my life. Not the kind of fear that keeps you alert, but the kind that keeps you chained. And for a time, I carried those chains with pride. By the time I was 10, I had memorized long surahs before I could even write my own name. I recited hadith punishments as though they were bedtime stories. I did not know what love was supposed to feel like, but I knew what fear felt like, and I mistook it for devotion. My goal was not to thrive, but to survive, not to bloom, but to remain invisible, obedient, and faithful. I began fasting during Ramadan at that age, enduring the ache of an empty stomach while receiving my father's praise for my strength. The hungrier I felt, the prouder he became. Yet somewhere inside, a small stirring began, a whisper asking, "Why do I feel nothing when I am supposed to feel peace?" It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even doubt. It was emptiness, a spiritual numbness I didn't have words for at the time. And still, I buried it deep, afraid of what might grow if I let it breathe. The older I got, the more I tried to prove my loyalty. I memorized more verses, fasted more strictly, avoided any contact with boys, and kept my gaze low in public. Every night, after the prayers were said and the lights were dimmed, I lay in bed with a dull ache in my chest. I told myself it was weakness. Maybe I had not prayed with enough intensity. Maybe I had not submitted with enough sincerity. Maybe Allah had turned away because I was not good enough. So I tried harder. But the harder I tried, the greater the ache became. That ache was the quiet beginning of my journey. Not in rebellion, but in silent questioning. If you have ever felt that same ache, that emptiness despite doing everything right, then I want you to keep listening. Because the ache is not your enemy. It might just be the whisper of heaven calling you home. When I was 13, I began to notice that the emptiness I felt wasn't only inside my heart, it existed in my home. During Ramadan, every evening our family would gather for iftar. The table would be filled with dates, soup, flatbread, and lentils. My brothers laughed as though hunger had never touched them. My father led the prayer with the same stern authority he used to discipline us. And my mother, always the last to sit, served everyone before taking a bite herself. I watched her hands move automatically, her face calm but distant. One night, as I sat with a full plate in front of me, I felt as if I was floating outside my own body, watching the scene as an outsider. There was no peace, only pressure. In that moment, I realized something inside me had quietly broken. I could not speak of the emptiness I felt, not to my mother, my friends, or even myself. Silence was safety. Doubt was danger. So I buried my feelings under more memorization, more discipline. I fasted more than required, prayed until my lips cracked, and corrected my siblings when they made mistakes. Outwardly, I was the model daughter. Inwardly, I was crumbling. And as my questions grew louder, so did my fear. That same year, the dreams began. They were vivid, unsettling, yet strangely comforting. In one of them, I was wandering alone through the desert, lost and calling out. My voice echoed over the dunes, but no one answered. The sun burned my skin. My feet bled as I stumbled. Just when I thought I would collapse, a man dressed in white appeared on the horizon. He didn't speak. His face was too bright to look at for long, yet his presence calmed me. I woke with my heart racing and tears in my eyes. I told no one. Dreams like that could be considered blasphemy, but I longed to see him again. The dreams kept coming, always a variation of the same. Wandering, fear, exhaustion, then light, a hand reaching for me, my name whispered, and a peace unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the peace my father preached, the kind you earn through punishment and piety. This peace felt undeserved yet freely given. It was sweet. It was unconditional. One night I woke just before the call to prayer. Instead of preparing for ablution, I sat by the window, watching the stars fade into dawn. My heart ached, not for ritual, but for truth. Something unnamed pulled at me, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't real. I became obsessed with finding answers, but I had to be careful. In our village, the internet was slow and censored, and every question I typed was a risk. Using an old smartphone with a dying battery, I hid it deep inside my mattress. Slowly, I searched, erasing my history after each session. I began with, "Who is Isa in the Quran?" and fell into a rabbit hole of pages and testimonies. I learned that for some people, Isa wasn't just a prophet, he was everything. One night, I stumbled upon an Arabic translation of the Bible. My fingers trembled as I opened the book of John. I read the first verse aloud, slowly. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Something broke inside me. Something opened. Night after night I returned to those pages as though they were water in my desert. The verses spoke to a part of me that had been thirsty for years. They didn't scold me, didn't command me, they invited me. Jesus spoke of love, not fear, of grace, not wrath. My favorite verse became, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I whispered it over and over into my pillow, afraid to hear my own voice, but even more afraid to stop. The more I read, the more I understood why I had felt empty for so long. I had been feeding my soul rituals when it longed for relationship. For the first time, I didn't feel condemned. I felt seen. But with understanding came torment. I began to feel like a traitor. Every time I joined my family in prayer, my lips moved, but my heart was elsewhere. I was afraid to ask whom I was really praying to. Was I still seeking Allah? Or was I already seeking Jesus? Guilt consumed me, yet I couldn't stop. Every hidden moment with the Bible felt like breathing. Every prayer to Isa brought a peace I couldn't replicate. Then came the day that changed everything. My mother asked me to help prepare bread in the courtyard while my brothers played outside. I left my room in a rush, forgetting to hide the phone I kept so carefully wrapped under my mattress. It was a small mistake, but it changed my life. My younger brother Karim went into my room looking for his lost scarf. What he found was my secret world. I heard his voice before I saw his face, shouting in confusion and anger. He repeated one word, louder each time. Injil, the Bible. My blood ran cold. I dropped the bowl in my hands and ran. When I reached the room, I saw the phone in his hand, the browser open, the verses I had read just hours earlier still glowing on the screen. My heart pounded so hard I thought I would faint. His face twisted, not in fear, but in disgust. His voice broke as he called for our Father. She's reading the book of the Christians. The air seemed to vanish. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even lie. My father arrived within seconds. He read the verses in silence, his hands trembling, not from confusion, but from fury. He struck me before I could open my mouth. But the blow wasn't the worst part. It was the look in his eyes, as though he no longer recognized me, as though overnight I had become a stranger, a danger, an infection. He called me kafira, apostate, disgrace. My mother froze behind him, silent, her face expressionless. My sisters hid behind the door, peeking through tears. That night, I was no longer his daughter. I was a threat that had to be removed. He paced the room repeating one word over and over. Betrayal. Then he made a decision no words can prepare you for. He would cleanse the family's name. I was dragged outside into the courtyard, once a place of childhood memories, now turned into an execution ground. My wrists were tied with rough rope, my knees pressed into the sand. My father stood beside me with a small container of fuel. I could smell it before I saw it, sharp, bitter, unmistakable. He spoke almost gently. You chose death when you chose Aisha. And in that moment, I knew there was no neighbor who would intervene, no one who would save me, except perhaps the one I had just begun to know. The moment my father poured the fuel over me, I could feel it soak into my dress, my hair, my skin. The smell clung to my lungs, making every breath heavy. I wanted to scream, to beg, to fight, but I knew it would change nothing. No one would hear me. No one would come. I realized in a strange clarity that this was his right in the eyes of our community. This was his religion. I closed my eyes and did the only thing left to me. I prayed. Not the memorized Arabic verses that had never brought peace, but the words of my heart. I whispered to the one who had found me in secret, Jesus, stay with me. My father struck a match. The first one failed. The second flared in his hand, a tiny sun before he let it fall. The flames leapt like an unleashed beast, clawing up my legs, my torso, my face. The pain was not just pain. It was consumption. The fire didn't just burn my skin. It invaded me, searing through my nerves, tearing at my breath. I heard the sound of my own voice breaking into something unrecognizable. Somewhere in the agony, the ropes began to burn, fibers snapping far too slowly. I fell to one side, unable to stand. My vision blurred, the world melting into light, heat, and silence. And then, it stopped. No more fire, no more sand, no more breath. I thought I was dead. I expected darkness, but I was surrounded instead by infinite light, soft and enveloping like a blanket I'd never known I needed. There were no walls, no sky, only presence, only peace. I felt him before I saw him, as though my soul recognized a heartbeat outside of myself. I turned, slowly, carefully, and there he was. A man clothed not in fabric but in light. His face shone with something I had never seen before: compassion, strength, holiness. He extended his hand, and I knew without words who he was. Jesus. He did not speak at first. He didn't have to. His presence told me everything: that I was loved, that I was safe, that I was home. I fell to my knees and wept, not from pain, but from relief. When he finally spoke, he said my name, only my name. Yet in that name I heard purpose, belonging, eternity. Then he said, I have chosen you. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. He showed me faces, people, lives I was meant to touch. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in that light forever. But he looked at me and said, you must go back. I cried again, but I obeyed. His final words before the light faded were, I am with you. When I opened my eyes, the light was gone. The smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. The steady beep of machines surrounded me. My body was wrapped in white gauze from head to toe. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. But I was alive, and that alone defied any medical explanation. I heard nurses whispering in the hallway, the movement of police outside my room, the faint hum of an old ceiling fan. Not one member of my family came to see me. Later, I overheard that my father had told the village I was dead. Others whispered that he had sworn to finish what he started if I ever returned. But I knew why I was still here. Because Jesus had held me in his presence. Weeks passed as I lay in that hospital bed, barely able to lift a spoon. I couldn't bathe myself, couldn't walk, couldn't even cry. The skin around my eyes was too damaged. But my spirit began to heal faster than my body. A nurse named Hannah began visiting me every day. She was quiet, patient, different from anyone I had met. She helped feed me, cleaned my wounds, and sometimes sat in silence beside me. One day, when she knew I could sit up, she brought me a gift wrapped in cloth. A Bible. Not a screen, not a file, a real one. Holding it felt like holding water after crossing the desert barefoot. I clutched it to my chest and wept until I could weep no more. Hannah became more than a caregiver. She became a doorway. She introduced me to a small hidden network of believers. They had helped other women like me, women who had escaped persecution, violence, and death for choosing to follow Jesus. A family across the border in Tunisia agreed to take me in. The plan was dangerous, the journey uncertain, but I knew I couldn't stay. With Hannah's help, I crossed the border in the back of a truck, wrapped in blankets to protect my raw skin. Every bump in the road sent waves of pain through me, but my heart was full of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. When we arrived, I expected only safety. What I found was family. They asked nothing in return. They didn't flinch at my scars. They welcomed me with open arms and one word that still echoes in my soul: sister. They fed me, clothed me, and prayed for me with tears in their eyes. They didn't see a broken refugee. They saw a daughter of the King. Slowly, painfully, but with joy, I began to recover. I joined their secret gatherings, a circle of believers who sang softly by candlelight and shared scripture like it was treasure. And for the first time, I sang with them. My voice cracked, my eyes filled, but I sang. I began to tell my story, at first in whispers, cautiously. But the more I spoke, the more hearts opened. Women still in hiding, men still questioning, teenagers whispering, "I have felt that emptiness too." I realized my pain wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my purpose. Jesus hadn't saved me just from the fire. He had saved me for something greater. Every time I shared, I remembered his light, his voice, and his words. They need to hear. So I spoke, not as a preacher, not as a hero, but as someone who was once lost and is now found. Forgiveness was the hardest part. My body began to heal long before my heart did. Even after the bandages came off, I still heard my father's voice in my dreams. I still saw the match fall. I still felt the silence in my mother's eyes. Many nights I woke up drenched in sweat, angry and afraid. How do you forgive someone who tried to kill you? Who chose honor over love? Who looked at your life as disposable? I didn't have the answer. All I felt was pain. And yet, every time I opened my Bible, I read the same words: love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. I wanted to skip those verses. I wanted justice. But Jesus whispered, "I forgave you." One night, I collapsed to the floor and cried out, "Jesus, I don't know how to forgive them. Help me." I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a vision. But in the silence, I remembered who I had been before him. Frightened, empty, condemned, and how he had loved me anyway. Not because I was good, but because he is good. Slowly, I began to pray for them. Not for vengeance, but for salvation. I spoke their names into the night: Yusuf, Fatima, Karim. I asked Jesus to show them what he had shown me, to heal them as he had healed me. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It didn't make it right, but it freed me from carrying it like a stone around my neck. And in that freedom I found peace, not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the real peace only Jesus can give. As I grew stronger, the network of believers encouraged me to share my testimony beyond the safe walls of our gatherings. At first, I resisted. My scars were still tender, my nightmares still vivid. But the more I prayed, the more I sensed his nudge. Tell them what I've done for you. So I began speaking, not to large crowds at first, but to small groups. Women who had fled abuse, young men who were secretly searching for truth, those who felt trapped by tradition but starving for something real. Each time I told my story, I watched faces change, fear replaced by hope, shame replaced by longing. And I knew this was why he had sent me back. The risk was real. In my country, to speak openly about following Jesus was to invite danger, even death. But the fear that once chained me no longer held me. I remembered the moment in the light, his hand reaching for mine, his words, that I was chosen. That truth burned brighter than any threat. Some days, I spoke in whispers, in safe rooms behind locked doors. Other days I spoke in the open, trusting him with my safety. Every word felt like planting seeds, not knowing which ones would take root, but believing he would make them grow. Over time, I began to see fruit. People who had once been silent began to ask questions. Some started reading the Bible in secret, just as I had. A few even chose to follow him, knowing it could cost them everything. I prayed with them, wept with them, and reminded them that Jesus never abandons us in the flames. That promise was not theory for me. It was my story. And each time I said it, I believed it a little more. If you're hearing my story now and you feel the same emptiness I once felt, if you've been living in fear, following rules without love, praying into a silence that never answers, I need you to know this. There is more. There is love that cannot be earned, peace that does not depend on performance, truth that is not afraid of your questions. Jesus is not waiting for you to fix yourself before you come to him. He will meet you right where you are. That's what he did for me, in the middle of fire, in the middle of betrayal, in the middle of my silence. I don't know what you're facing today. Maybe your family has turned away. Maybe your faith feels hollow. Maybe you've been told who you have to be, what you have to believe, and how much you are worth based on rules, fear, or tradition. But I am here to tell you that there is someone who calls you by name, not the name they use to condemn you, but the one he gives you when he makes you his own. And if you let him, he can take the ashes of your life and make them into something beautiful. He did it for me. He can do it for you. Don't wait. Call on him now, even if your voice shakes. Tell him, Jesus, if you are who you say you are, I want to know you. That moment could change everything. If my story has touched you, don't let it end here. The same Jesus who met me in the fire is ready to meet you in your struggle, your doubt, and your silence. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect. You don't even have to know what tomorrow will bring. All you need is the courage to say, Jesus, I want to know you. That one step could change your eternity. If you're searching for truth, if you're tired of fear, or if you've been living in the shadow of tradition without peace, I invite you to take the same step I did. Open your heart. Speak to him as you are. And if this testimony has awakened something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope today. You could be the spark that ignites their own journey to the light. Subscribe to this channel and follow Jesus. Not for religion, not for ritual, but for relationship. Because Jesus is not a list of rules. He is the Savior. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And right now, he is calling you by name, just as he once called me by mine. Share this video with someone who is questioning, someone who is afraid, or someone who thinks they've gone too far. Let them hear this truth. Jesus sees them, loves them, and has not forgotten them. Your action today could be the seed that begins someone else's transformation. Leave a comment below, even if it's just one word. Found, searching, hurting. We read them. We pray over them. And if you're in a place where speaking openly is dangerous, remember that your silent participation is still seen. You are loved, and you are not alone. To my brothers and sisters around the world who suffer for their faith, who gather in secret, who read the scriptures in hiding, who whisper his name in the dark, I see you, because I was once like you. And I want you to remember this. The world may reject you, but heaven calls you chosen. Hold fast. The fire may come, but Jesus will never abandon you in the flames. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing my story to become part of yours. I will be here, sharing, praying, and walking this road with you. Because we don't just tell stories, we give testimony. Keep seeking, keep hoping, and keep holding on to the one who holds you. Until next time, stay close, stay strong, and stay in his light.